These were years of reordering of priorities. The younger women of the movement were, to my view, conservative and unimaginative. They failed to grasp that the political triumph of suffrage without equality in the institutions of industry, family, and religion would be a Pyrrhic victory. To my mind, if we had bravely untwisted all the strands of the fourfold cord that bound us and demanded equality in the whole round of the circle, we should perhaps have had a harder battle to fight, but it would have been more effective and far shorter. But Susan was determined to focus all her attention on a singular aim, and like Poe's Raven, to cry suffrage evermore. The young women surrounding her, her nieces, quite agreed with her. All of my own children were grown and living far afield. Hattie was in England with her husband and little Nora. Theo was in France with his wife Marguerite and little Lisette. I found that my longing for the human productions of my life, my children and my grandchildren, proved more attractive than the intellectual productions of strategies and campaigns. I also preferred the intellectual stimulation and family conviviality I found in England and France, and took to spending months abroad. If Susan had not made it clear that the cause required its mother as much as my children did, I may have stayed abroad, a suffragist expatriate. But there was work to be done. There was always work to be done, though my heart shrank from it. The first time I left Harriet and Nora in England, I didn't cry, but my knees shook. I wrote to a younger suffragist, when you are 73 years old, you will appreciate my reluctance to leave your own bed, rocking chair, and writing desk. The word go has lost all charm for me. I think my future work must be done with the pen. Each time I returned to the work, I found an increasingly chilly atmosphere. My radicalism, particularly my challenge of convention, capitalism, and organized religion, alienated me from Susan's lieutenants. They took their marching orders from Susan, the Napoleon of our movement, and she said that I must stay. Oh, but they would far rather have done with me. I obliged them in 1892, 2 years after the National's merger with Lucy Stone's American Women's Suffrage Association, a development that both Matilda Jocelyn Gage and I opposed. My resignation speech was The Solitude of Self and is among the best things I ever wrote, and that's saying something. It was my own declaration of independence, my own assertion of the truth Lucretia Mott counseled me to claim some 50 years before. To be spurned by the very cause I had a hand in creating was a bitter blow. But whatever I said of my solitude of self, I was not alone. Susan had her lieutenants, but I had my supporters too. There were younger suffragists of the bolder variety who shared my radical convictions. These free thinkers celebrated my publication of the Woman's Bible, but they were in a minority. The nation was disgusted with me, of course. Nothing new there. But I did hope for support within the movement I had led for 50 years. Afraid of any association with such radical notions, NASA disavowed my book and turned their backs on the lifetime of work I had given the cause. This might have troubled me more if I did not believe that in the sunset of my life it was my special mission to tell people what they were not prepared to hear, rather than to repeat worn-out opinions. Of all my young friends and supporters, my favorite was my own daughter, Harriet. In England, Harriet circulated among radicals, democratic socialists, suffragists, and reformers. She had a special interest in the rights of working-class women and a belief in a practical influence of a spectacular and demonstrative feminism. Feminism, a new word for a new generation. Like her mother, Harriet was a writer, and like me too, she took her words directly to the people. In time, Harriet would organize tens of thousands of women in street parades that demonstrated that women had no more patience with polite petitions. They intended to seize the rights we proclaimed in 1848. Harriet and I did not always agree. We even debated publicly, as she was horrified by my late life belief in an educated suffrage. I had seen enough of how men in power manipulated the ignorant. Harriet maintained that I should have stayed the course, and that universal rights, including universal voting rights, are the only true foundation of freedom. My own view, rightly or wrongly, was that enlightened women must bring the nation up to a more hallowed democracy, just as a mother raises her children. I believed it was women like me that those in power most feared. The rulers in the state are not willing to share their power with a class over whom, as equals, they could never obtain absolute control, whose votes they could not manipulate to maintain the present conditions of injustice and oppression in every department of life. As in the family, the mother desires to see her children equally provided with the good things in life. So, as an equal factor in the state, her influence would be for an equal distribution among all, for a system of political economy that would prevent the extremes of poverty and wealth, secure clothes, food, shelter, and education to the whole people. Such, I believe, would be the policy of educated, enlightened women. I wrote that a year before I died. As the sun drew down and my eyesight failed, my vision grew clearer. My heart was as bold as ever, but it was weak. I could no longer travel, and I relied on my children's help. Susan continued to make demands of my time, but the little Stantons, so intimidated by her in childhood, were all grown up now. The mischievous souls who troubled my hours when I was young now gave me the peace I needed to write. And so I wrote. Letters, editorials, pronouncements, and speeches poured from my pen during those last beautiful years. Until the very last day, my mind was never still, and my vision was always fixed on the future. In 1848, we called on our nation to make good its promises of equality of rights. I never saw suffrage, but my granddaughters and the generations who followed them realized the promises we made here in Seneca Falls on those long ago days when even the first whispers of our great cause filled us with hope beyond measure. I consecrated my pen and my voice to liberty. Such a choice, though glorious, is not without consequence. Perhaps it started in Johnstown, when I witnessed the injustices in my father's law office, or in London when I witnessed the exclusion of women from one of the great movements of our age, or in Seneca Falls when we gathered together in protest. Maybe it started generations before I was born, and I was merely baptized into a river long running. Who can tell? Words in action. Inhalation and exhalation, centripetal and centrifugal force, masculine and feminine, theory and strategy, the rub-a-dub of agitation. There are still some mysteries even death does not solve. But here's what I do know. The degradation of disenfranchisement begins with the birth into the class or caste to which the individual belongs. In the case of sex, there is ever a lower depth for the woman. To whatever class or nationality she may belong, she is not only subject to the powers above her, but to the man at her side. Here is the secret of the infinite sadness of women of genius. For just in proportion as they occupy an even platform with man, they are surprised and aggravated with the assumptions of superiority and the artificial framework in society that makes him so. An assumption that woman in her inner nature never concedes, an authority she utterly repudiates. But man has the prestige of centuries in his favor, the force to maintain it, and he has possession of the throne which is 9/10 of the law. He has statutes and scriptures and the universal usages of society all on his side. And what have we? The settled dissatisfaction of half the human race, the unorganized protest of the few, and the open resistance of still fewer. But we have truth and justice on our side, and the natural love of freedom, and step by step we shall undermine the present form of civilization and inaugurate the mightiest revolution the world has ever witnessed.